Okay, so the Rebbe's anniversary is Gimmel Tammuz, the third day in the Hebrew month of Tammuz. But the truth of the matter is, this date has a much earlier marking or place in the Chabad calendar. In 1927, this year's 95 years ago, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose name I carry, all the Lubavitchers today are called Mendel, right? When I was growing up, they were all called Yossi. The previous Rebbe's name was Yosef Yitzchak, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerz, and I carry his name. And all of my friends were Yossi, Yosef Yitzchak. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe was living in Soviet Russia at that point. And not that long before, Russia had what could be argued the strongest Jewish community in the world. They certainly had the most scholarly, the best yeshivas by far were in Russia, Lithuania, and then the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks took over that part of the world, and they were into business. They were into changing the way people distributed wealth. But somehow they decided that God's a problem. You know, if the Bolsheviks would have left God alone, if Lenin had not picked on God, he would let the Christian church be Christian and the Jews be Jewish, but he would have changed the economic system of the haves and the have-nots. Wouldn't have worked. No, you had to take God out of the equation. And they did a very good job. They did a terribly good job. And the previous Rebbe built a network of underground chadorim. There's an actual list that was written at the time, in the 20s, of over 300 cheders. Not they weren't necessarily very big, but 300 in different communities. The previous Rebbe was personally supporting the teachers to teach Yiddish kinderlach, little boys and girls, Kom Salafah. The rudimentary, the very beginnings of being a Jew. And he stood like a rock. The previous Rebbe, the Frediker Rebbe, stood like a rock against the Soviets. He was an incredibly great activist. He was very cool as a public servant. He knew how to do stuff. He was a big-time operator. He was an incredibly great activist. But he was also, what's the word? He really believed it. He was an idealist. He was an idealist to the degree that he was prepared to pay with his life. He was literally prepared to pay with his life for the preservation of Judaism in Russia at the time. There's a famous scene, this is one of the Chabad stories, that when the boys sit around in the middle of the night and they run out of stories of this Rebbe, they tell this story. But there was an occasion when the previous Rebbe, at a public gathering, tore open his shirt. He tore open his shirt and he pointed at his bare chest. And he said, "You see this body burning? Don't stop teaching the children. You see this body burning? Don't stop teaching the children." And he meant it. And they arrested him and put him in jail. The plan was to shoot him as soon as he was living in Leningrad at the time, in Petersburg. And the plan was to shoot him as soon as he walked through the prison doors. In other words, there'd be no time for any negotiation, no time for any political pressure, no time to spread the word. The previous Rebbe tells the story from his angle. They told him, go to this and this room. He said, but they didn't tell me at what time. So he was walking in this Shpalerka prison. It's a very famous prison in Leningrad. Now it's called Petersburg. It's still there. I visited that city 30 years ago. And we walked by and we were told, don't take any pictures. So there were hallways perpendicular to each other. One set of hallways were dark with these cinder block walls with lanterns, and the other hallways were beautifully decorated, for offices. And there was a bench. So on the way to the room that he was told to go to, he took a detour from the hallway that looked so sinister and dark to the hallway which looked nice and comfortable. And He lit up a cigarette. He took a smoke. I'll get there, room 60 when I'm ready. And some officer walked out of an office and saw the Rebbe and said, what are you doing here? He said, well, they told me to go to room 60. He says, it's impossible. Because you walk through that door, boom, they shoot you in the back of the head. He says, can't be. He says, yeah, that's what they told me. He says, wait. And he survived. They didn't shoot him that night. He lived another 23 years. Miracles, incredible miracles. He spent 18 days in jail, 18 days in the Frediker prison. During those 18 days, they beat him physically. They beat him. Oh, he was very obnoxious, the previous Rebbe. He spoke a perfect Russian. He spoke only in Yiddish. All of the Chavre, a bunch of Jews, you have sects here. They were Yevreiske sects here. They were all, unfortunately, some of them were ex-yeshiva. Some of them were guys who held a grudge against him because they kicked him out of the yeshiva 20 years before and they were paying their debts now. They were Yidden. He spoke to them only in Yiddish when they were doing cross-examinations. He never made eye contact. He looked down. And he would never stand up for them. He would never show them respect. To him it was a principle. A princip. It was a principle. They beat him and they beat him and they beat him. They beat him. They beat him. So many times. There's a story that he told that they came into his cell, the previous Rebbe's cell, where he was being held with 4 other men. And he told them to stand. I don't speak Russian. I know a few Russian words. It's cool, but I don't speak the language. I'm sorry. Ya Amerikansky. My father was born in Moscow. This is a cute little thing for you to know. He left Russia at the age of 8. And they told him that the Sovietsky Soyuz is lyhadus. Sovietsky Soyuz is a bad place. So he refused to speak Russian. All of his friends speak Russian to this day. My father forgot the language. Forgot the language. He was a very religious kid. You understand? He refused. All of the Russian was their first language. It's his mamalosh. But as a boy of 8, he said, if Sovietsky Soyuz is lyhadus, Jan came into this cell where the previous Rebbe was sitting and told him to stand up, because there was a rule in the prison that when they ever gave you the official word of the prison, so first of all, as a prisoner, you didn't have a name. When they brought you into the prison, they gave you a number. A yardlik, just like the Machon, the Nazis. They gave you a number, and you were identified by the number. You were 56452. That was it. You had no name. It was part of the psychological wearing down of the person, especially of political prisoners. And they told him to stand. And he wouldn't stand. He didn't say no, he just wouldn't stand. So he told them, if you're not going to stand, we're going to hit you. He says, you've hit me before. So they hit him. They beat him. And they went out. They came back a half an hour later. They said, stand. So he says, I'm not going to stand. He says, we'll hit you again. He says, you'll hit me again. So he said, they were pleading with him. We want to give you good news. We want to tell you something good about your case. He says, he refuses to stand. They hit him a second time. And they left. And they didn't hit. You don't understand what it means, hit. They beat him. So they went out, and they came in a third time, and they said, they're calling you to the office. So now he's not standing up out of respect, he's going to the office. They called him into the cabinet, they called him into the office, and he went, and they told him that he's free to go. That was what they wanted to tell him. But initially, they sent him off to exile in Asia for 3 years. He was sent off to exile. The exile lasted exactly 9 days, and then he was free to leave altogether. But he went off to exile in Kastrema. He left the Frediker prison also on the same date, on Gimmel Tammuz, the 3rd day in the month of Tammuz, in the year 1927. And then, so many years later, in 1992, the Faparachan in the Jordan, how much is 95 minus 28? 68 years, right? 60? 68 years after the previous Rebbe left prison, our Rebbe, this is his day. So he went home for a couple of hours. They asked him if he wants to go on the government's penny or he can afford to travel himself. If he traveled himself, he could travel a little bit better. He says, I'll pay for my own way. He went home for 3 hours and he came to the Vokzal, he came to the train station. And there were thousands of people who came to see him off. Thousands of Yidden, thousands of Jews. Every one of those Jews was playing with his life. Just to show up. to show respect to Rav Schneerson. Then in Russia, he was enemy number one. He was next to Trotsky, Mamish, next to Trotsky was the Frediker Rebbe. Labeled Trotsky was a big macher. And they hated the previous Rebbe the way they hated the way Lenin, Stalin hated Trotsky. And thousands of Jews came to see him off. The previous Rebbe had left instructions that nobody should come to the train, nobody. So nobody minus 5,000. The people came. So the Rebbe said, the previous Rebbe said to himself, all these people risked their lives to see me off. I have to speak. I have to say something. Remember, he's a prisoner. He's essentially moving from a prison to a prison. And he stands up on the platform of the train, and he speaks loud. He spoke in Yiddish, but they spoke Yiddish was Mameloshen in those days. It wasn't like today. In Russia, Yiddish was Mameloshen. It was the mother tongue, the tongue that you had from childhood. And he made a short speech. It took maybe 5 minutes. And he said unbelievably powerful things. He said, 75 years ago, my great-grandfather, whose name was Menachem Mendel, after whom our Rebbe was named, was summoned by the Tsarist government to a meeting involving Jewish education. The government wanted to interfere with how we raise our children, teach our children. And my great-grandfather said, the Jews are in exile. We don't have our own homeland, and we certainly don't have our own sovereignty. We don't have our own independence. And we have to accept that. It's not our choice. We didn't choose to live this way, and we're not going to choose to end it. God Almighty is going to make the decision when Mashiach is going to come, when we're going to be sovereign, when we're going to be governors of our own fate, fully, completely. But you need to know, this is what he said, our bodies were exiled. Not our souls and not our minds. You can do what you wish to the body of a Jew. But when it comes to the Jewish soul, the Jews have always said, and we continue to say, and we will always say, I'm saying the Hebrew, Al tigu b'mshichayev and v'yei al tareyu. Do not touch my anointed ones and do not do harm to my prophets. The Talmud says, my anointed ones in reference to the children. And the third Lubavitcher Rebbe said to the Tsarist government at that time, the way we raise our children is none of your business. So the previous Rebbe said that 75 years later, it's a different government, it's a different Rebbe. But Jews have to know that only our bodies were exiled and not our souls. And when it comes to our souls, we declare with the multi-millennia Jewish firmness, hardness, lack of yielding. Do not touch my anointed one and do not do harm to my prophets. And the anointed one goes on the children. This is what he said on that platform in that date. It was almost an act of suicide. It was a really bold and brave. It was a chutzpah. It was almost disrespectful. But the Rebbe said, if the Jews came to see me off, I cannot not support. They're supporting what I am doing. The end of the story was that he was spent off to Kostroma, which is a city deep in Russia, and after literally 9 days, he was told he can go home. And he went back to Leningrad, went back home, and he realized that he couldn't stay in Russia anymore because he became the sacred cow, he became the untouchable, but anybody who came to him went into jail instead, you understand? So he's the only free man, the rest of Russia is a prison. So all the people he was working with now couldn't, if they would come to see him, they put him in jail. So the stories have details, that's not important. Less than a year later, he was out of Russia with his family. Less than a year later, by October of that year, 1927, he moved to Russia, and he went to Riga, then he later Latvia, then he moved to Poland, and of course when the war started in 1940, he came to the United States of America. When the previous Rebbe came to this country in 1940, he was 60 years old. They showed you a picture of him, but when he was healthy. When he came to America in 1940, he was in a wheelchair. He couldn't talk and he couldn't walk. He was an invalid who suffered from many illnesses. He suffered from paralysis. He suffered from multiple sclerosis. He rolled off that ship. I mean, the people who remember him coming off the ship, who I knew, it's 80 years ago, so the people who have recollections of that have to be in their 90s now. But I've met people who remember. He says, I did not come here to rest and retire. I did not want to come to this country. I'm in this country only because God brought me here. And I am not going to sleep for a moment. He says, I'm going to make America into what Europe was. And an old, broken man, literally couldn't talk, couldn't walk. No people, no money, no connections, no friends. In a foreign land. Said, I'm going to make Yiddishkeit in America, as they say, azoyv der alter heim. Like it was a Hamish, you understand, like it was in the old country. And he did. He lived only 10 years here. But he laid the foundation. It's not by mistake that the day that we commemorate the Rebbe's life is the same as the day that the previous Rebbe came out of jail. And I just want to plant a seed. We're going to take another break. I'm going to try my best to be a good boy. It's not that difficult to get me to start the talk. It's only very hard to get me to stop, because I suck on, you know the story with the button and the candy. You know that joke, right? There was this rabbi whose wife used to give him a sucking candy, and he put it in his mouth right before he started his drasha. When the sucking candy ran out, he stopped speaking. And one day he talked, and he discovered that she gave him a button. I have a button in my mouth, but I'm trying very hard to remember that I'm supposed to suck on it like it's a sucking candy. I just want to plant this here. I just want to share an idea with you, and I hope to develop this. I'm making a statement, okay? And you can agree or disagree. I mean, you can disagree with everything I'm saying. It's okay with me. It's good to have difference of opinion. We have to figure out how to communicate, you know. We live in a world that if two people disagree, they automatically hate each other. The idea that we can disagree and talk, which is basically, there's a word for that, you know. There's a word for it. It's called an adult. An adult. That's just one word, an adult. We can disagree and be best friends. It's very hard for me. Don't kid yourself. But believe me, when I was younger, it was impossible. If you disagreed with me, then you were bad. Why? Because I was right. How else could it be? Because I'm me. You see the universe? There's an axis. I'm the axis. Don't you see everything is revolving around me? But okay. I just want to make a statement. Jews have so much tradition, have so much history of suffering, of hardship. And we're good at it, you know? We're good at it. Jews are very good at surviving. We're very good at, you punch us in the nose and we get better. It's a funny thing about you. The harder their lives are, the brighter their star shines. We have a very, very difficult time when we're not suffering. When our lives are good and peaceful and safe and unafraid. My father used to say to me, the worst thing in the old country wasn't the bad things that happened. It was the fear of the bad things, because that never stopped. You couldn't sleep. Fear, it corrodes your soul. It steals your joy, your will, your essence. And we live in America. We live in America, and last time I checked, America's a pretty good place for Jewish people. I'm not on the bandwagon of America being bad to Jews. I don't belong to that team at all. And we seem to have such a difficult time when things are right. And if you want to understand the Lubavitcher Rebbe, if you want to understand the Rebbe, whose yahrzeit we are commemorating, that's his whole business. His whole business was to bring Judaism to Jews who have it good. Jews who have it bad, we have 1,000 years of experience. We're so good at it. We're so good at it. But when you take away, you know, the Rebbe once said to, what's his name? Yitzhak Rabin, the Prime Minister of Israel. He was He was then the ambassador of the United States to of the state of Israel to Washington D.C. In 1970, he came to see the Rebbe for the Rebbe's 70th birthday. President Shazar was a Chabad Chassid, and he made him go see the Rebbe. Rabin wasn't so excited about the idea, but the president made him his official emissary to go see the Rebbe for the Rebbe's 70th birthday. And the Rebbe asked him straight up, Jewish survival is due to Jewish tradition or to anti-Semitism? That's a very uncomfortable question. Jewish survival is attributable to Jewish culture, Jewish tradition, Jewish Torah, mitzvahs, or to anti-Semitism. So Rabin didn't say what he told the Rebbe. But the Rebbe told him it's a combination. Now take away the anti-Semitism. Take it away. What happens? This is us. This is our Rebbe. This is our generation. Okay, now we'll sing a niggin, yeah? Take a break. Okay, wo sind Sie, Chasen?